My name is Eleanor Bennett. I'm 62 years old, and my only daughter told me I wasn't close family enough to come for Christmas. That single text message detonated my world, but it also set in motion a series of events that would ultimately involve a $35 million inheritance, a team of shrewd lawyers, and 67 frantic, unanswered phone calls. I'm telling you my story today from my study here in Greenwich, Connecticut. It's a crisp autumn morning, the kind that makes the sea look like polished steel, and the air smells of salt and wood smoke. It's a world away from where this story truly began. I'd love to know where you're all listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. Please let me know in the comments below. For me, this journey started not with that cruel text, but 3 months before it, on a gray, drizzling afternoon that smelled of rain and profound loss. The day I buried my best friend was the day my old life effectively ended, though I didn't know it yet. Victoria Harrington wasn't just a friend of 40 years, she was my business partner, my anchor, my confidant, and the fiercely brilliant sister I'd never had by birth. We had built a successful real estate advisory firm from nothing, her with her audacious negotiation skills, and me with my quiet eye for detail and unwavering diligence. Her funeral was a somber blur of expensive black suits, hushed, sympathetic murmurs from people I barely knew, and the hollow, cavernous ache in my chest that had taken up permanent residence. A week after the funeral, I found myself sitting in the polished mahogany office of her longtime lawyer, Richard Gable. Richard was a man who seemed to be carved from the same sturdy oak as his imposing desk, solid, reliable, and possessing a seriousness that was both comforting and intimidating. He slid a thick, cream-colored envelope across the gleaming table. My name was written on the front in Victoria's elegant, decisive script, the ink a vibrant peacock blue. "She left this for you to read privately, Eleanor," Richard said, his usually booming voice softened with a lawyer's practiced empathy. The drive back to my modest, quiet house in the suburbs, the house where I'd raised my daughter, Caroline, where every scuff on the baseboards held a memory, was a complete daze. The envelope sat on the passenger seat beside me, its physical weight nothing compared to the emotional gravity it emanated. Back in my own kitchen, with the familiar scent of lemon polish and old books, I finally found the courage to break the wax seal. The heavy paper felt cool and vital beneath my trembling fingers. "My dearest Eleanor," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then I'm off on my next great adventure, and I've likely left you with a considerable mess to sort out. For that, I am only a little sorry. You were always the one who knew how to handle the details with grace, while I just kicked down the doors." I could almost hear her dry chuckle in those words, and a fresh wave of grief washed over me. "Eleanor, you are the kindest, most generous soul I have ever known. You are a wonderful mother, a fiercely loyal friend, and the sharpest, most intuitive partner a woman could ever ask for. But your kindness, my dear friend, has always been your greatest vulnerability. You give pieces of yourself away so freely, especially to your family, that I have often worried you would leave nothing for yourself. You build everyone else's kingdoms and forget to fortify your own. That's why I've done what I've done. The inheritance I'm leaving you is not a gift. Please, do not think of it as a gift. It is a tool. It is armor. It's a fortress from which you can finally, without apology, put your own needs first. You've earned every single penny of it 100 times over, not just for your brilliant work in our firm, but for the lifetime of unwavering support you gave me when no one else did. Now, a word of warning, and I need you to listen to me as you always have, with your whole heart. Money changes people. Or rather, it doesn't change them so much as it gives them the resources and the audacity to reveal who they truly are. When word gets out about your new circumstances, and it will, you will see true natures laid bare. People you love, people you have sacrificed for, will show you colors you never knew they possessed. Be prepared. Be strong. Do not be surprised. Don't let anyone, not even your own blood, make you feel guilty for what is rightfully yours. Don't let them treat your past sacrifices as an entitlement for their future gains. This is your time now. Build walls where you need them. Open gates only for those who have proven they deserve to enter. Live beautifully and fiercely. You owe it to me, but more importantly, my dear, dear friend, you owe it to yourself. All my love, forever, Victoria. I folded the letter, my hands shaking so badly I could barely align the creases. The tears I had held back at the funeral, the tears I had choked down in Richard's office, finally streamed down my face in hot, silent rivers. She knew. Of course she knew. Victoria, with her eagle eyes, had always seen everything so clearly. She had seen the way Caroline would call me for last-minute babysitting with an air of expectation, not request. She had seen the way James would make thinly veiled, condescending comments about my quaint little house. She had seen how my own savings, my nest egg for retirement, had been systematically drained to fund their down payment, their car repairs, their ever-expanding list of wants that they presented as needs. I had always told myself it was simply what mothers did. Victoria saw it for what it was. I was being taken for granted, my value measured only by my utility. For the next 3 months, I lived in a quiet, grief-stricken fog, trying to process both the loss of my friend and the staggering scale of my new reality. Richard had patiently walked me through the portfolio, the stunning 15-acre coastal estate in Greenwich where Victoria had lived, income-generating properties in 2 other states, a carefully managed portfolio of stocks, and an art collection that was, in itself, a small fortune. The total value was somewhere north of $35 million. I hadn't told a soul, not even Caroline. How could I? It felt like a life belonging to someone else. I was still just Eleanor Bennett, a widow in a quiet suburban town, rattling around in a house that felt emptier each day. And then, as the first Christmas without Victoria loomed, a season I was already dreading, the text message arrived. I was sitting by the fire, looking at a small, perfectly wrapped gift for my granddaughter Emma, when my phone buzzed with the casual cruelty that would change everything. That night, sleep was a stranger I had no interest in entertaining. I lay in bed, the glow of the streetlights painting pale, ghostly stripes across the ceiling, and my mind, unbidden, began to replay a lifetime of moments. It wasn't a gentle stroll down memory lane. It was a forensic accounting of my own heart. A flickering, silent film reel of every sacrifice, big and small, that I had laid at my daughter's feet. Each memory was another thread in the intricate tapestry I had woven around her, and tapestry she had just, with a few taps of her thumb, ripped to shreds. I saw myself at 28, a new widow navigating a world that suddenly felt sharp and hostile. I was holding a tiny, red-faced Caroline in my arms in the dead of night, rocking her back and forth, whispering a promise into her downy hair that she would never want for anything. It was a promise I had clung to like a prayer, a vow I had kept at immense personal cost. The film reel spun forward. I saw myself in my late 30s, sitting at the kitchen table long after Caroline was asleep, my eyes gritty with exhaustion. By day, I was working full-time at the burgeoning real estate firm with Victoria. By night, I was taking on extra bookkeeping work for local businesses. The numbers would blur on the ledger pages, but I kept going, fueled by coffee and determination. Every extra dollar was meticulously funneled into her college fund. I pictured the day I handed her the passbook, the balance representing thousands of hours of lost sleep and foregone comforts. She was 18, vibrant and beautiful, ready to take on the world. She'd glanced at the number, her eyes widening for a second before she gave me a breezy, "Wow, thanks, Mom," and tucked it into her bag. She accepted it as her due, a natural stepping stone to the private university she had her heart set on, from which she would graduate, thanks to me, completely debt-free. The scene shifted. I was in my early 50s. Caroline and James had just announced their engagement. They were in love, they were ambitious, and they had found their dream house in a desirable suburb with great schools. The only problem was the down payment. They were just a little short. I remember sitting with them in my living room, watching them hold hands, their faces a carefully calibrated mask of hope and anxiety. We just need another 20,000, Mom, Caroline had said, her voice soft and pleading. The bank won't approve the loan without it. We'll pay you back, of course, as soon as James gets his next big promotion. I knew they wouldn't, but I looked at my daughter's hopeful face and I thought of the promise I had made to her infant self. The next day, I went to my safe deposit box. I took out the diamond earrings my own mother had left me, her most cherished possession. They were old-fashioned, set in platinum, and they were the last piece of real value I owned, a tangible link to my own past. I sold them to a private jeweler. I didn't get what they were worth, but I got enough. When I handed Caroline the check, I told her I'd sold some old jewelry I never wore. I never told her about the hollow feeling in my chest every time I opened my jewelry box and saw the empty velvet slot where they used to rest. The most vivid memory, the one that twisted in my gut with a fresh, sharp pain, was from just 2 years ago. For my 60th birthday, I had finally booked the trip of a lifetime, a 3-week tour of Italy. I had dreamed of it for decades, of seeing the David in Florence, of drifting through the canals of Venice, of standing in the heart of the Colosseum. My bags were practically packed. My passport was ready. A week before I was due to leave, my phone rang. It was Caroline, her voice a tearful panic. "Mom, you're not going to believe this. Marie, the nanny, she just quit. No notice. Just walked out. And James and I are supposed to leave for Hawaii on Starty. It's our anniversary. The whole trip is non-refundable. We'd lose thousands." I stood in my hallway, the Italian phrasebook open on the table beside me. I could already taste the limoncello. "Oh, honey, that's terrible," I said. "What will you do?" There was a weighted pause. "Well," she began, her voice thick with manufactured helplessness, "I know this is the worst timing in the world, and it's a crazy thing to ask, but could you possibly postpone your trip just for a little while and watch the kids? You're the only one we trust. Please, Mom. It would mean the world to us." The world to her, my world to me. The choice was stark. I looked at my dreams, packed neatly in a suitcase, and I looked at my daughter's manufactured crisis. And I did what I had always done. I chose her. I called the travel agency and canceled my trip, losing the deposit. For the next 2 weeks, while Caroline and James sent me sun-drenched photos of themselves holding cocktails on a beach, I was chasing my grandchildren, Lean and Sophie, through the park, mediating arguments over toys, and making endless plates of chicken nuggets. When they returned, tanned and glowing, they handed me a souvenir keychain shaped like a pineapple. "We missed you guys so much," Caroline had chirped, giving me a quick, distracted hug before rushing off to unpack. The worst part, I realized as I lay there in the dark, wasn't the individual sacrifices. It was the crushing, cumulative weight of them. It was the casual, unthinking assumption that my life, my time, my money, and my dreams were all secondary resources, a community chest for their exclusive use. I was the safety net, the eternal backup plan, the provider of last resorts. I had become so reliable that I had become utterly invisible. And now, with a few dozen words in a text message, the people I had given everything to had informed me that I was no longer essential personnel. The pain of it was a physical thing, a cold, heavy stone in the pit of my stomach. But as the hours ticked by and dawn began to bleed gray light into the room, something else began to crystallize. Victoria's letter. Her words weren't just a comfort, they were a prophecy, and now a blueprint. "This is your time now. Build walls where you need them." The text message wasn't just an insult, it was an emancipation proclamation. It was the final, irrefutable piece of evidence I needed, the permission I hadn't known I was waiting for to finally stop setting myself on fire to keep others warm. In the pale light of morning, I got out of bed, a new and unfamiliar resolve settling deep in my bones. I went downstairs, made a pot of strong black coffee, and sat at my kitchen table. The house felt too quiet, too small, filled with the ghosts of a life that was no longer mine. For the first time,
I thought of the sprawling coastal mansion Victoria had left me, not with a sense of being overwhelmed, but with a sense of tactical possibility. It was time to move. Not just houses, but my entire existence. I picked up my phone, my fingers steady now. I didn't call Caroline. I didn't call my sister, who would undoubtedly tell me to be the bigger person. I was done being the bigger person. From now on, I was just going to be my own person. 2 days later, I was sitting not in my small, cluttered kitchen, but in the soaring great room of Victoria's. No, I had to start thinking of it as my estate in Greenwich. The floor-to-ceiling windows, 2 stories high, looked out over a dormant winter lawn that swept down to the gray, choppy waters of the Long Island Sound. The sheer scale of it was still intimidating. A life tailored for a giant like Victoria, but for the first time, as I sat there, I felt a burgeoning sense of ownership, of command. This wasn't just a house, it was a headquarters.
Across from me, in deep leather armchairs that flanked a magnificent man-sized stone fireplace, sat my newly assembled war council, Richard Gable and Patricia Devereaux. I had specifically asked them to come here, to the set of my new power, because I wanted them to understand the gravity of what I was planning. This was no longer about my personal hurt feelings. This was a strategic realignment of my entire life. I had laid it all out for them, my voice even and devoid of self-pity. I told them about the years of being taken for granted, culminating in the finality of the Christmas text. Then I handed them Victoria's letter. I watched their faces as they read it. Richard's expression, already serious, hardened into a protective glare. The professional mask of a lawyer was gone, replaced by the fierce loyalty of a friend. Patricia, ever the diplomat, simply read, her eyes sharp and analytical, her expression unreadable until she finished. She folded the letter carefully and handed it back to me. "Well," she said, her tone crisp and final, "that settles that." Patricia was the first to speak further. "Good," she said, leaning forward. "The emotional reaction is processed. It's in the past. Now, the strategic response begins. This is not a family squabble, Eleanor. This is a hostile takeover attempt on your life. And they don't even know the assets they're trying to acquire yet. We will not meet this with tears or anger. We will meet it with overwhelming, elegant force." Richard leaned forward, his hands clasped. "She's right, Eleanor. Victoria foresaw every bit of this. She was adamant. The will itself is ironclad, but she also left specific instructions and resources for me to help you set up a series of trusts and a family foundation. Her exact words to me were, 'I'm giving Eleanor a battleship. I need you to teach her where the cannons are and how to aim them. We can shield the assets in such a way that they are completely and solely under your control. Any legal challenges would be not just difficult, but financially ruinous for the challenger.'" "A challenge?" I asked, the thought sending a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. "You think they would do that?" "I think," Richard said, his eyes grave, "that when $35 million are on the line, you plan for the worst. A desperate person, especially one being advised by your son-in-law, might try to claim you're not of sound mind, that you're grieving and being subjected to undue influence. It's a nasty, brutish tactic, but it happens. Our best defense is a proactive offense. We must establish a clear, public record of you being decisive, in control, and acting with unimpeachable intent." That's when Patricia's eyes lit up with that familiar, tactical glim I'd seen when she used to describe navigating a tricky negotiation at the UN. "Then that's precisely what we'll do," she said. "We will not hide. We will craft a new narrative for you, Eleanor, a public one. We need to establish your new status in a way that is undeniable, long before they even know what game is being played." She leaned in, her voice dropping with the thrill of a well-conceived plan. "This Christmas party you mentioned, it's perfect. It's not just a party, it's a debut. Your debut. We won't invite the old crowd, the ones who only know you as Caroline's sweet mother. We'll invite my crowd, People of influence. That author I know who just won the National Book Award, that painter whose work hangs in the Met, a few old diplomatic hands who know how to tell a story. People whose casual mentions on social media carry weight. And I, she continued, a sly smile plying on her lips, will make sure a few very tasteful, very candid photos find their way online. Nothing gauche, just a tasteful glimpse of Eleanor Bennett, the elegant hostess and philanthropist, in her magnificent new home surrounded by fascinating people. It's a passive broadcast of power. I looked from her to Richard, the audacity of it taking my breath away. You want me to show off? The idea felt foreign, so unlike the quiet background person I had always been. No, Patricia corrected gently, her tone softening. I want you to occupy your space. I want you to let your new life be seen. Caroline and her grasping husband won't see a mother who is flaunting her wealth. They will see a woman who has a full, rich, important life that has absolutely nothing to do with them. It will bypass their logic and go straight to their egos. It will drive them mad, far more effectively than any angry words ever could. Richard nodded slowly in agreement, a look of deep respect on his face. From a legal standpoint, it's brilliant. It creates a public record of your vitality, your social engagement, your intellectual acuity. It preempts any ridiculous claims of infirmity before they can even be conceived. It shows you are the master of your own ship. The plan was audacious, it was manipulative, it was so very Victoria. And in that moment, I realized she hadn't just left me money, she had left me her lieutenants. She had left me Richard and Patricia, the two people on Earth who understood how to wield the power she had bestowed upon me. A slow smile spread across my face, the first genuine smile in days. So, I said, the words tasting of newfound strength, we throw a party. We take a few pictures, we let the bait float on the water and see who bites. Precisely, Patricia said, her smile mirroring my own. And while they're splashing around in a blind panic, you, my dear Eleanor, will be quietly signing the papers with Richard that rearrange the entire world they thought they were entitled to. The path forward was clear. The grief was still there, a low hum beneath the surface, but it was now overlaid with something new and sharp and thrilling. A plan. The night of the party, 2 weeks later, a light, crystalline snow began to fall, the fat, lazy flakes drifting down and dusting the great oaks on the lawn. It was as if nature itself was conspiring with Patricia's stagecraft, blanketing the estate in a layer of pristine cinematic beauty. Inside, the house was the antithesis of the cold outside. It was filled with warmth, the murmur of sophisticated conversation, and the soft, intermittent clinking of champagne flutes. The air smelled of fresh pine from the towering 20-foot Christmas tree in the great room, mingled with the savory aroma of rosemary-crusted lamb that was being prepared by the caterers. I stood by the massive stone fireplace, the midnight blue silk of my dress cool against my skin, and felt a sense of surreal calm wash over me. This was my house. These were my guests. I was not an accessory or helper. I was the center, the sun around which this elegant new solar system was revolving. These weren't Caroline's friends who would corner me by the appetizers to complain about their contractors or ask if I could watch their kids next weekend. These were Patricia's people, and by extension, they were becoming mine. I found myself in a fascinating conversation with a celebrated author, a man whose novels I had admired for years, about the challenges of writing a compelling female protagonist. He listened to my thoughts with genuine interest. Later, I spoke with a painter, a vibrant woman with streaks of silver in her black hair, whose work hangs in the Met. She complimented the art Victoria had collected, and we fell into an easy discussion about the emotional impact of color.
And then there was Harold Kearns. He was a dealer in rare art, a man Victoria had known and respected for years. He had a kind, intelligent face and a gentle demeanor that immediately put me at ease. He approached me not with the fawning deference some had shown upon seeing the house, but with a quiet, genuine warmth. Victoria always said you were the brains of the operation, you know, Harold said, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled. She said you had an instinct for property, for its bones and its soul, that simply couldn't be taught. Looking at this house, feeling the life you're already bringing back into it, I can see she chose her heir very, very wisely. His words were a balm. It had been so long since anyone had seen me as anything other than a mother, a grandmother, a problem solver. To be seen as competent, as shrewd, as myself, was a pleasure I had almost forgotten existed. Patricia, ever the director of our little play, moved through the room with the effortless grace of a seasoned ambassador. She would subtly steer people towards me, draw me into conversations, and then drift away, leaving me to stand on my own. She was not propping me up, she was showcasing me. I found myself laughing, a deep, genuine laugh that came from my belly for the first time in what felt like an eternity. I was not performing, I was simply being. Later in the evening, I saw her in a quiet corner near the grand piano, her phone held discreetly in her hand. She looked up and caught my eye, giving me a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. The bait was being cast into the digital waters. I knew what she was doing. She had taken a few photos throughout the night, nothing posed, all seemingly candid. There was one of me laughing with Harold by the fireplace, the firelight catching the silk of my dress. There was another of me rising a glass for a toast with a group of guests, the magnificent, art-filled room stretching out in the background. She had crafted the caption with the precision of a diplomatic communique, designed for maximum impact with minimum aggression. Celebrating a beautiful Christmas season with the incredible Eleanor Bennet in her stunning new home. A queen in her castle. So wonderful to see you shining, my dear friend. It was perfect. To the wider world, it was a lovely, celebratory post. To its intended audience of one only, it was a targeted missile, a beautifully wrapped declaration of independence. The party wound down after midnight. As the last guests departed, leaving their warm good wishes and genuine promises to connect soon, Patricia gave me a quick, firm hug at the door. "The opening act is complete," she whispered in my ear, her eyes sparkling with satisfaction. "Now get some rest. The real performance begins tomorrow." I went to bed that night in a vast four-poster bed that felt like a ship on a calm sea. The snow fell silently outside my window, blanketing the world in quiet. A profound sense of peace settled over me. The plan was in motion. Whatever happened next, I knew I was not alone, and I was no longer weak. The next morning, I woke to the bright, clean light of a world covered in fresh, untouched snow. I made myself a pot of coffee and sat in the glass-walled breakfast nook, watching a cardinal, a splash of brilliant red against the white, peck at a nearby holly bush. It was a perfect, tranquil, cinematic moment. Then, steeling myself, I picked up my phone and I saw that the storm had made landfall. The strategic silence lasted for 3 full days, 72 hours. It was, without a doubt, one of the most difficult and most profoundly liberating things I have ever done. Every maternal instinct I possessed, honed over nearly 4 decades, screamed at me to answer the phone, to smooth things over, to manage my daughter's escalating distress. It was a role I had played on autopilot for my entire adult life. But the new, steely voice of reason, the voice that sounded so much like Victoria, and now a little like Patricia, told me to hold the line, to wait. "Let her sit in the discomfort, Eleanor," Patricia had advised during a brief, pre-planned call on my landline. "Let her spin out. Let her confront the shocking reality that your world does not, in fact, revolve around her. Your silence right now is the loudest message you can possibly send. It says, I am busy with my own life. You are not my priority." It will tell her more than 1,000 words of anger or explanation ever could. And so I let the silence do its work. During those 3 days, I felt a fundamental shift occurring within me. The frantic, desperate energy emanating from my silent phone was a stark, almost comical contrast to the growing peace and resolute in my own heart. I was no longer reacting to her chaos. I was observing it from a place of calm. I was in control. I used the time productively with a focus that felt new and exhilarating. Richard came to the house on the second day, his briefcase bulging with a mountain of paperwork. We sat in the library, a fire crackling in the hearth, the scent of old leather and wood polish in the air. For hours, I read and signed document after document. The Harrington Bennett Foundation for the Arts was officially chartered, its mission statement clear, and its endowment secured. Then we moved on to the more personal, more painful part of the restructuring. A series of irrevocable trusts were established, one for each of my grandchildren, Emma, Liam, and Sophie. Richard had structured them brilliantly, according to Victoria's forward-thinking instructions. The funds would be managed by a neutral third-party trustee and would become accessible to them only upon their 25th birthdays. But there was a very specific clause, a character clause, as Richard called it. He said, "This clause is the key, Eleanor." He tapped the dense paragraph with the end of his gold pen. "It states that access to the trust is conditional upon them demonstrating a consistent and independent relationship with you, free from parental influence or interference. It doesn't require them to love you. It requires them to know you as an individual. It gives them a choice and a chance to break the family cycle. It incentivizes a genuine connection, not one filtered through Caroline and James's agenda. It's about relationship, not just blood." I also created a separate generous trust for Mrs. Lynn, Victoria's loyal housekeeper who had stayed on with me. She had been with Victoria for over 20 years, and her quiet dignity and unwavering loyalty were things I valued immensely. She had seen it all, my daughter's casual disrespect over the years, the way Caroline would breeze in and treat the staff like invisible furniture. Rewarding Mrs. Lynn's steadfast loyalty felt like a small but significant act of cosmic justice. Finally, Richard slid the last document across the polished desk. It was the amendment to my personal will. As I signed my name on the line that officially removed Caroline and James as beneficiaries, I didn't feel the hot flush of anger or the bitter taste of spite. I felt a quiet, sad resolve, like a surgeon making a necessary but painful amputation to save a life, my life. I was closing a door. I was choosing to protect my future and Victoria's legacy from the destructive patterns of the past. While I was fortifying my legal walls, Caroline was apparently trying to find a way over them. On the evening of the third day, I received an email, not to my personal account, but to the general inquiry address for the old real estate firm, which I was still monitoring. It was from a cousin in Ohio.
Subject: worried sick about you. Dear Eleanor, I hope this email finds you. I'm so sorry to bother you at work. Caroline called me yesterday in a complete state. She said she's been trying to reach you for days, and she's worried sick that something has happened. She mentioned some strange photos of a big new house and is afraid that, in your grief, someone might be taking advantage of you. Please, please just let us know you're okay. The whole family is concerned. I read the email twice. It was a masterful little piece of manipulation. The carefully chosen phrases, worried sick, taking advantage of you, the whole family is concerned, were designed to paint me as a fragile, elderly victim and her as the dutiful, concerned daughter. Unable to break through my wall of silence directly, she was now trying to rally the rest of the family, planting the seeds of the narrative that I was incompetent. That email was the final signal. The silence had done its job. The legal framework was now a fortress. It was time for the first direct engagement. That evening, I finally turned my cell phone back on. The barrage of notifications was instantaneous, a digital scream of missed calls and desperate texts. I ignored them all and dialed Caroline's number. She answered on the first ring, her voice a strained, breathless mess. "Mom! Oh my God, Mom, finally! I've been so worried. Are you okay? Where are you?" "I'm perfectly fine, Caroline," I said, my voice even and calm. I was walking through the grand sunroom, looking out at the deep purple of twilight settling over the sound. "I've just been very busy."
The silence on the other end of the line was no longer the silence of an unanswered call, but the sharp, ringing silence of utter shock. I could picture Caroline perfectly, her mouth slightly agape, her brow furrowed in disbelief. She was not accustomed to hearing the word no from me, especially not delivered with such cool, unassailable finality. "What?" she finally sputtered, the single word laced with a rising tide of indignation. "What do you mean, no? Mom, don't be ridiculous. I already told you it was a misunderstanding." "Was it, Caroline?" I asked, my voice remaining level and calm, a stark contrast to the frantic energy coming through the phone. The word seemed quite clear to me. Just close family. I'm simply honoring your wishes. "I didn't mean it like that," she insisted, her voice climbing in pitch, the cloying sweetness of her initial greeting curdling into a frantic, desperate whine. "I was just stressed. James has been under so much pressure at work with his salary negotiations, and I wasn't thinking. Of course you're close family. We were just talking about how wonderful it would be for the kids to see you in your beautiful new home." She was still pushing, still scrambling, still believing she could manipulate her way back into the picture, back into the will I had not yet told her she was no longer in. It was time to draw a firmer, clearer line in the sand. "My plans for the holiday are made, Caroline. The subject is not open for discussion." A new, uglier tone crept into her voice then. It was a whining, petulant sound I hadn't heard since she was a teenager who'd had her car keys taken away for a week. "You know, James was just saying, this is an awful lot for you to handle. All this money, a big new estate, all alone. Especially after the trauma of Victoria's funeral and everything. He's worried about you. We're worried about you. A woman your age, suddenly coming into a fortune like this, maybe you're not, well, maybe you're not thinking as clearly as you used to. Maybe you're not in a position to be making sound financial decisions on your own." My blood ran cold. It felt as if a bucket of ice water had been dumped over my head. It wasn't a direct threat, but it was the unmistakable, chilling shadow of one. A woman your age, not thinking clearly, not in a position to be making sound financial decisions. She was testing the waters for the most vile, most insidious of legal challenges. To have me declared mentally incompetent, to seize control not just of the inheritance, but of my very life, my autonomy. She was threatening to strip me of my dignity and have me declared a doddering old fool, all under the benevolent guise of concern. A wave of pure, cold fury washed over me, so intense it almost made me dizzy. It wasn't the hot, messy anger of a shouting match. It was the focused, glacial rage of a mother seeing the absolute worst in her own child. She would not just take from me, she would break me, humiliate me, and have me stripped of my personhood to get what she wanted. In that single horrifying moment, any lingering trace of maternal sentiment, any shred of guilt or doubt was cauterized from my soul. This was no longer a family squabble over hurt feelings. This was a war, and she had just threatened to use a nuclear option. I took a deep, steadying breath, letting the silence stretch for a beat, letting her feel the atmosphere change. When I spoke again, all warmth, all emotion was gone from my voice. It was the voice of a CEO addressing a hostile subordinate who had just made a career-ending mistake. "Caroline," and the name was a sliver of ice, "I want you to listen to me very, very carefully. For your information, this conversation is being recorded." It wasn't, but the effect was instantaneous. I heard a sharp, strangled gasp on her end. "My lawyer," I continued, my words deliberate and evenly spaced, "is Mr. Richard Gable of Gable, Stern and Associates. I'm sure you remember him. He was not only Victoria's most trusted advisor for 30 years, but he is also the executor of her estate and the co-signer on the board of the new foundation we have established. He is, as you can imagine, exceptionally interested in any and all attempts to question my soundness of mind. Any such move, however veiled, would be met with the most aggressive and financially devastating legal response imaginable. Do you understand me? She was utterly, completely silent. I'm going to extend one and only one courtesy to you and your husband. I will be hosting a formal dinner party here at the house next Saturday evening. You are both invited. We have matters of the estate and my future plans to discuss in a more formal setting. I suggest you attend. Be here at 7 o'clock sharp. And with that, I ended the call.
I stood there in the dark sunroom, my hand still clutching the phone, my heart hammering against my ribs. The mask of calm fell away, and I leaned against the cool glass of the window, my body trembling with adrenaline and a righteous, terrifying rage. She had threatened me, her own mother. She would have seen me stripped of my dignity and my freedom, all for the money she felt entitled to. The dinner party, which had been Patricia's idea for a final, elegant revel, now felt different. It was no longer just a stage for a dramatic announcement. It was a courtroom, and I was no longer just the plaintiff. I was the judge, the jury, and the executioner. And the verdict was lowered in. The week leading up to the dinner was one of intense, focused preparation. My home was no longer just a residence. It had transformed into a theater, and I was the producer, director, and lead actor of the immersive play that was about to unfold. Every detail, from the lighting to the menu, was meticulously planned, every element designed to contribute to the final, crushing denouement. Patricia, my ever-brilliant strategist, was in her element. She understood the shift in stakes immediately. "This is no longer a simple revel, Eleanor," she'd said over the phone the day after my explosive call with Caroline. "This is now about containment and control. After a threat like that, however veiled, we must assume they are desperate and might do something foolish. The dinner is no longer just about informing them. It's about disarming them in front of unimpeachable witnesses." Our guest list was refined with this new purpose in mind. It included Patricia, of course, whose mere presence was a statement of support, and the kind art dealer Harold Carnes, whose quiet decency would serve as a stark, living contrast to the naked greed in the room. We also invited Dr. Eris Thorne, a retired and highly respected history professor from Yale, a man of formidable intellect and unimpeachable reputation, along with his equally sharp wife, Eleanor. Most importantly, at my insistence, Richard Gable would be present. He would not be there as a casual friend, but as a silent, powerful authority, a living embodiment of the legal fortress I had built around myself. His presence at the table would be a constant, unspoken checkmate. While Patricia managed the stagecraft of the evening, I worked on the script. My script was the menu. I sat down with the caterer, a young, creative chef Patricia had recommended, and I designed a 5-course meal that would tell a story. It was a story only I would understand until the very end, a symphony of symbolism that would play out on their plates, course by agonizing course. The first course would be exquisite, handcrafted vegetable terrines. They would be beautiful to look at, with intricate, colorful layers of pureed carrots, spinach, and beets. But they would be, in essence, cold and hollow inside, a perfect reflection of my daughter and son-in-law's superficial charm. The second course? A salad composed of the most bitter greens, radicchio, endive, and frisée, tossed in a sharp, almost acidic lemon vinaigrette. This would be the taste of the truth I had been forced to swallow. For the main course, I offered a choice, a small test of character. The first option was a wild-caught salmon, pan-seared to perfection, delicate and flaky. It represented authenticity, strength, and a life lived in the open. The second option was a classic beef Wellington, a dish famous for presenting a flawless golden brown pastry exterior. However, I had a special request for the chef.
Prepare the Wellingtons so that the very center of the beef, the heart of the cut, would be served cold. The choice they made would be telling. The final course before the denouement would be individual chocolate soufflés, the most notoriously temperamental of desserts, famous for their magnificent, airy rise and their tragic tendency to collapse at the slightest disturbance. A perfect edible metaphor for their soaring hopes and their imminent fall. On the day of the dinner, a strange, preternatural calm descended upon me. The trembling anger from the phone call had solidified into a diamond-hard resolve. As I dressed for the evening, I chose my outfit like a general choosing her uniform. I wore a tailored, cream-colored cashmere dress, elegant and understated, conveying authority, not flash. For jewelry, I wore a single, striking piece, a modernist silver brooch Victoria had given me years ago. It was bold and slightly sharp at the edges. It felt like wearing a piece of her strength, her armor. Downstairs, the house was perfect. The lighting was soft, the fire was lit, and a professional string quartet was softly playing Vivaldi in the corner of the great room. It was the picture of serene, old-money elegance, a world away from their grasping, desperate reality. Richard arrived first, his presence solid and reassuring. He shook my hand, his grip firm. He said, "Ready, Eleanor?" His eyes searching mine for any sign of doubt. I replied, "More than ready, Richard," my voice steady. Patricia arrived with Harold and the Thorns. Patricia gave my arm a supportive squeeze. She murmured, "The stage is set, my dear. Break a leg." Then, at exactly 7 o'clock, the doorbell chimed. Mrs. Lyne, her face an impassive professional mask, opened the door to admit Caroline and James. They were a sight to behold, a jarring note in the symphony of the evening. Caroline was wearing a flashy, tight-fitting red dress that was slightly too loud, slightly too desperate for the occasion. James was in a slick suit that looked expensive, but fit poorly across the shoulders. His smile stretched a little too wide across his face. They were carrying an ostentatiously large bottle of champagne, a transparently sycophantic gesture. They looked less like dinner guests and more like contestants on a game show, trying desperately to impress the host and win the grand prize. Caroline gushed, rushing forward to hug me. Her embrace was stiff and awkward, her designer perfume overpowering. She said, "Mom, the house is just breathtaking. You look wonderful, so relaxed." I said, "James, so good to see you," as he shook my hand. His palm was damp with nervous sweat. I introduced them to the other guests. It was painful to watch. They tried to ingratiate themselves, James loudly complimenting Dr. Thorne on a book he'd clearly never read, Caroline gushing over Patricia's recent trip to Paris. They were performing, and they were failing. I led them into the dining room. The table was a vision of crisp white linen, sparkling crystal, and polished silver. Caroline and James were seated opposite me, with Richard placed strategically at the head of the table, a silent, observing monarch. As the first course was served, the beautiful, hollow terrines, I raised my glass. "I'd like to thank you all for coming tonight," I said, my voice carrying easily in the suddenly quiet room. I looked directly at Caroline and James and gave them a small, serene smile. The curtain was up. The play had begun. The dinner unfolded like a slow, deliberate symphony of escalating discomfort. My true guests, Patricia, Harold, and the Thorns, chatted with the easy grace of people who are comfortable in their own skin and genuinely interested in others. They discussed art, travel, history, and the changing political landscape. But on the other side of the table, a palpable tension was building, an invisible wall of social anxiety. Caroline and James were out of their depth, and they knew it. They were tourists in a country where they didn't speak the language.
The first course, the beautiful but hollow vegetable terrines, was met with forced enthusiasm. Oh, Mom, this is so elegant. It's like something out of a magazine, Caroline exclaimed, a little too loudly. She devoured hers quickly, as if to prove her sophistication, while her eyes darted round the table, assessing the competition. James followed suit, complimenting my exquisite taste, and trying to engage Dr. Thorne in a conversation about French cuisine that quickly revealed his ignorance. They were performing, but their eyes kept flicking towards Richard, whose silent, authoritative presence seemed to loom over the entire meal. Then came the second course, the salad of bitter greens. As the plates were set down, I watched their faces with detached curiosity. James took his first bite, and a barely perceptible frown flickered across his lips before he quickly masked it with a watery smile. Caroline, less adept at hiding her feelings, pushed the sharp, bitter radicchio leaves around her plate with her fork, a look of distaste clouding her features. "A bold choice of greens, Eleanor," Dr. Thorne commented, his eyes twinkling as if he were in on a private joke. An acquired taste, perhaps, but a rewarding one for a mature palate. "I find I'm acquiring a taste for many new things lately, Aris." I prolied him smoothly, meeting his gaze. "Especially for things that are honest and unapologetic." Caroline forced a smile. "It's very European," she offered weakly, the best she could come up with. The main course arrived. The moment of the small test. The server presented the options with professional poise. Patricia, Harold, and the Thorns all chose the wild-caught salmon, the choice of authenticity. When the server turned to Caroline and James, James answered for both of them without a moment's hesitation, his voice full of false bravado. "We'll have the beef Wellington, of course, a true classic." He clearly believed it was the more expensive, more impressive option. I watched as the two perfectly golden pastry parcels were set before them. I saw James cut into his portion with an air of great satisfaction, reveling the pink meat inside. He took a bite, chewed with a self-congratulatory air, and then, for a fraction of a second, his jaw stopped moving. I knew exactly what he was tasting. The expertly cooked, flaky pastry, the savory mushroom duxelles, and then the jarring, unexpected coldness at the very center of the beef. The heart of the dish was icy. It was a culinary lie. Beautiful, impressive presentation, hiding a cold, unappetizing, and deeply disappointing truth. He swallowed with some difficulty, his smile becoming strained. "Excellent, Eleanor, truly top class. A perfect medium rare." Caroline took a bite of her own, and her fork clattered softly against her chin plate. She looked up at me, a flicker of genuine confusion and something else, perhaps suspicion, in her eyes. "Mine's a little cold in the middle, Mom?" "Is it?" I asked, feigning mild concern. "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. The caterers are usually so reliable." I didn't offer to send it back. I didn't apologize further. I just let her sit there with the cold truth on her plate, forcing her to either eat it or admit defeat. Throughout the meal, they kept trying to steer the conversation towards my new situation, their attempts as subtle as a foghorn. "So, Mom, have you even had a chance to think about what you're going to do with all of this?" Caroline asked, gesturing vaguely around the opulent room. "It must be so much work to manage. You'll probably need some help, a good financial advisor you can really trust. James knows some excellent people." "I have all the help I need, dear," I said, taking a delicate sip of water. "Victoria made sure of that." James jumped in, leaning forward earnestly. Of course, but family is family. We just want to make sure you're protected. There are a lot of unscrupulous people out there who might try to take advantage of a woman in your position." The hypocrisy was thick. I could have cut it with my butter knife. By the time the dessert plates were cleared away, the tension was a living entity at the table. The soufflés had been magnificent upon arrival, puffed high and proud in their individual ramekins, a testament to culinary ambition.
And as designed, they had begun to deflate almost immediately, sinking into a dense, sad puddle of chocolate by the time the last spoonful was taken, a perfect, edible metaphor for their collapsing hopes. It was time for the final act. I dabbed my lips with my linen napkin, placed it neatly on the table, and pushed my chair back slightly. The quiet conversations around the table trailed off as all eyes turned to me. The string quartet had finished their set, leaving a profound silence in their wake. "Thank you all again for joining me tonight," I began, my voice calm and measured, carrying easily in the still room. "I invited you here because there are significant changes in my life, and I believe in transparency, especially when it comes to family." I looked directly at Caroline and James. Their faces were a grotesque mixture of greed, apprehension, and naked anticipation. They leaned forward slightly in their chairs like wolves scenting blood in the water. As some of you already know, my dearest friend and partner, Victoria Harrington, left me her entire estate. It is a responsibility I take with the utmost seriousness. The total value of the assets, after estate taxes, is approximately $35 million. A collective sharp intake of breath came from Caroline and James. It was the first time they had heard the number, the full, staggering scope of what they believed they had lost and what they were now desperately hoping to reclaim. James's face went completely pale. Caroline's eyes were wide and glassy with a look of pure, unadulterated avarice. "It is a vast fortune," I continued, my gaze unwavering, "and with it comes a great duty. A duty to honor the legacy of the brilliant, generous woman who built it. Victoria and I spoke often in her final months about her wishes, about her values. She believed that wealth should be used to foster loyalty, to create beauty, and to reward genuine connection. It should never, never be treated as an entitlement." My gaze was locked on my daughter now, and I did not soften it. She also taught me that one's true value isn't measured by what one gives, but how that gift is received and respected. It's a lesson I admit I was very slow to learn. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle in the silent room. "When you sent me that text message, Caroline, telling me I wasn't welcome for Christmas because I wasn't close family, you gave me the unexpected gift of clarity. You helped me understand Victoria's lesson completely. And when you later suggested on the phone that I might not be of sound mind to manage my own affairs, here I glanced pointedly at Richard, who gave a minute confirmatory nod. You cemented my resolve." Caroline's face crumpled as if it were made of wet paper. The color drained from James's. They looked like they had been physically struck. "Therefore," I said, my voice ringing with a final undeniable authority, "I have spent the last few weeks, with the expert guidance of my lawyer, Mr. Gable, finalizing my estate plans to honor both Victoria's wishes and my own hard-won values."
The Harrington Bennett Foundation for the Arts is now fully chartered and endowed and will be the primary beneficiary of the estate. My loyal housekeeper, Mrs. Lynn, who has shown more familial loyalty than many with my own blood, has been provided for with a generous trust in her name. And trusts have been established for my grandchildren, Emma, Liam, and Sophie, which they can access when they are mature adults, provided they have taken the time and effort to cultivate a direct and sincere relationship with me, independent of any other influence. I took one final, deep breath and delivered the killing blow, the words clean and sharp as a guillotine. "As for you, Caroline, and you, James, you have been completely and irrevocably removed from my will. You will not receive a single penny." Checkmate. The silence that fell over the dining room was absolute and profound. It was not a peaceful silence. It was a vacuum, a void created by the detonation of a bomb.
The string quartet had long since finished their set, and the only sound in the vast room was the soft crackle of the fire in the hearth and the frantic, silent thumping of my own heart against my ribs. It was the sound of victory. Caroline's face was a horrifying mask of disbelief. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no sound came out. The vibrant, confident red of her dress seemed to mock the bloodless pallor of her skin. She looked from me to Richard, then back to me, her eyes wide with a dawning, panicked horror. This wasn't a negotiation. This wasn't a discussion. This was a verdict delivered from on high, and there was no court of appeal. James was a statue carved from shock. His slicked-back hair and confident, predatory smirk had vanished, replaced by the slack-jawed gape of a man who had just watched his winning lottery ticket, his ticket to salvation, burn to ashes before his very eyes. The ostentatious bottle of champagne he had so proudly brought now seemed like a pathetic prop in a sordid tragedy of his own making. My other guests, my true friends, were impeccably still. They were my witnesses, my silent jury, and their stillness was a powerful statement of solidarity. Patricia's face held a look of quiet, fierce pride. Harold looked at me with an expression of profound sympathy mixed with deep respect. Dr. Thorne observed the scene with the detached academic interest of a historian witnessing a pivotal, irreversible moment of power shifting. You can't?" Caroline finally whispered, the words barely audible, a pathetic puff of air. "I'm your daughter, your only daughter." It was the last card she had to play, the card of biological obligation. "And I am your mother," I replied, my voice devoid of malice, filled only with a sad, immutable truth. "A mother you deemed not close enough for a holiday, but whose finances you felt entitled to. A mother whose mental fitness you were willing to publicly question to get what you wanted. Family, Caroline, is not a one-way street paved with entitlement. It is a delicate bridge built from planks of mutual respect, love, and appreciation. A bridge you chose to douse in gasoline and set alight." James finally found his voice, a strangled, desperate croak that was a pathetic echo of his earlier bravado. "Eleanor, please, there has to be some kind of misunderstanding. We can talk about this privately, just the family." He was pleading, his desperate eyes darting between me and Richard, the calm, immovable lawyer who held all the power. Richard spoke for the first time all evening, his calm, professional, and devastatingly final voice. "There is no misunderstanding, Mr. Fletcher. Mrs. Bennet's estate plans are in order, legally ironclad, and have been officially filed with the appropriate courts. Her instructions were perfectly clear, and she was found to be of exceptionally sound mind by multiple assessors. The matter is closed." The word "filed" was the final nail in their coffin. This wasn't a threat. It wasn't a negotiating tactic. It was a completed action. There was nothing to talk about. There was nothing to salvage. Caroline pushed her chair back from the table, the legs scraping harshly against the polished wood floor, a sound of pure violence in the quiet room. She stood up, her body trembling with a rage born of thwarted greed. She shrieked, her voice shrill and ugly, pointing a shaking finger at me, but her words aimed at a ghost. "This is because of her. It was always Victoria. She always hated me. She was jealous of our relationship. She was always whispering in your ear, poisoning you against your own family." The accusation was so pathetic, so transparently false, that it barely registered as an insult. It was the desperate cry of a child blaming a ghost for her own monstrous behavior. Victoria loved me, I said, my voice steady and clear, a final defense of my friend. And she wanted me to be protected, not just from strangers, but from those who would mistake my kindness for weakness. It seems her judgment, as it was in all things, was flawless. There was nothing more to say. The air was thick with their humiliation. Caroline grabbed her purse from the floor, her movements jerky and uncoordinated. James, white-faced and mute, stood up and followed her like a shadow, a broken man. They didn't say goodbye to the other guests. They didn't look at anyone. They fled the room, a trail of shame and shattered greed in their wake. Mrs. Lynn, ever the professional, was waiting at the front door to hand them their coats. I heard the heavy oak door click shut behind them, and the silence they left behind was, this time, a clean and peaceful one. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for the better part of an hour. My hands, which had been clasped tightly in my lap beneath the table, were trembling from the sustained adrenaline. Patricia was by my side instantly, her hand warm and firm on my shoulder. "It's done, Eleanor," she said softly, her voice filled with pride. "You did it." Harold came over, his kind face etched with concern. "Are you all right?" I looked at the faces of these true friends, people who valued me for who I was, not what I had. Tears welled in my eyes, but they were not tears of sadness or anger. They were tears of pure, unadulterated release. "I think," I said, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite name, "for the first time in a very long time, I am going to be." We didn't speak of it again that night. We moved back into the great room, and Harold, sensing I needed a complete shift in atmosphere, began telling a wonderfully funny and self-deprecating story about a disastrous rat auction he had once attended in his youth. The laughter that filled the room was genuine and healing, a balm on the raw wounds of the evening. As I bid them good night at the door an hour later, I felt a profound sense of lightness, as if I had been carrying a massive, invisible weight on my back for decades, and had just, finally, set it down. The path ahead was my own, no longer cluttered with the demands and expectations of others. Later, as I was getting ready for bed, I walked past the dining room. The table was still laden with the remnants of the meal, the collapsed soufflés, the half-eaten portions of cold beef, the discarded napkins.
It looked like the aftermath of a battle, and in a way, it was. It was the battle for my life. And tonight, for the first time, I had unequivocally, gloriously won. The drive back to their mortgage-to-the-hilt suburban house must have been a cocoon of toxic, suffocating silence. I wasn't there, of course, but I can imagine it so clearly, having witnessed the prologue to this particular drama for years. James would have been gripping the steering wheel of their leased luxury SUV, his knuckles white, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle would be twitching violently in his cheek. Caroline would be staring out the passenger window at the blur of streetlights, silent tears of rage and profound self-pity streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. I imagine the silence broke the moment the garage door rumbled shut behind them, sealing them into their private hell. $35 million, James would have hissed, the words like acid, each one a separate venomous dart. $35 million! And you got us cut out, completely and irrevocably. Do you have any idea what you've just done? Me? Caroline would shriek, whirling on him the second they were standing under the harsh fluorescent lights of their garage. This is my fault? You were the one who was always going on about her quaint little house, her old car. You were the one who said we needed to manage our expectations with her. You were the one who told me to send that text. You said, just be direct. Tell her you want a quiet Christmas. Those were your words. I told you to be smart. I told you to handle her. I didn't tell you to treat her like a piece of garbage. Just close family? What kind of an idiot says that to the person holding all the cards? I thought you knew how to play your own mother. The argument would have escalated from there, a vicious tornado of blame and recrimination tearing through their perfect on-the-surface life. All the little resentments, all the financial pressures they'd so carefully hidden behind a facade of social media vacations and designer clothes would have come spewing out in a torrent of ugliness. I needed that money, Caroline, he would finally confess, his voice cracking with a desperation that was ugly and raw. My last 2 commission checks were a disaster. That big promotion I was so sure about, the one we were banking on, it went to someone else last month. We're 3 months behind on the mortgage. I was counting on your inheritance to keep us afloat, to get us out of this hole. The word inheritance would hang in the air, a bitter, mocking joke. So that's what this was all about? Caroline would ask, her voice dangerously quiet, the tears of self-pity replaced by the cold fury of betrayal. My mother's money, not our future, but your failure? You used me. You pushed me to do this because you've been lying to me about your salary. The fight would have been ugly, brutal, and deeply personal. It would have been the final, fatal crack in a marriage that I now realized was never built on love, but on shared ambition and a mutual sense of entitlement. Their relationship was a house of cards, built on a foundation of greed and deceit, and I had just calmly, deliberately pulled out the foundation. In the months that followed, their lives unraveled with predictable speed. I heard bits and pieces through the family grapevine, which I now treated with a healthy, detached distance. They put their oversized house on the market in a desperate attempt to downsize. James lost his job, likely due to the stress and distraction of his collapsing world. The flashy SUV was repossessed. They were forced to move into a small, cramped rental apartment in a less desirable town. The whispers of their impending divorce became a loud, unavoidable fact. The legal proceedings were, I heard, particularly nasty, especially when it came to the custody of the children, who were now pawns in their parents' bitter war. Caroline tried, in her own clumsy and self-serving way, to reestablish contact with me. I received long, rambling emails filled with tear-stained apologies and nostalgic reminiscences of a happy childhood that seemed to exist only in her imagination. They were all about her pain, her regret, her hardship. They never once, in all those thousands of words, truly acknowledged mine. I read the first one, saw it for the manipulative plea it was, and then deleted the rest without opening them. The boundary was set. The door was closed. During this time, I was busy building my new life. I threw myself into the work of the Harrington Bennett Foundation. With Harold's expert guidance, we began acquiring pieces by promising young artists, setting up scholarships for art students, and planning a small private gallery on the estate grounds that would be open to the public by appointment. My life was filled with purpose, with beauty, and with people who engaged with me on a level of mutual respect and shared passion. Then, one sunny afternoon in late spring, the phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. I hesitated for a moment, a flicker of the old anxiety, then answered with my new, calm authority. "Grandma?" A small, hesitant voice said on the other end. My heart skipped a beat. "Em, is that you, sweetheart?" "Yes," she said, and I could hear the tears in her voice, but they were different from her mother's tears. They were genuine. "Grandma, I miss you. I know
I know my mom and dad messed everything up. I hear them fighting all the time. It's awful. She took a shaky breath. I don't care about the money. I miss my grandma. Can I please come see you? Just me? Tears welled in my own eyes. This was the one thing I hadn't dared to hope for, the one loose thread in this whole messy tapestry that I couldn't control. Em, my bright, sensitive, wonderful granddaughter. Oh, Em, I said, my voice thick with emotion, there is nothing in this entire world I would love more. That connection, that one pure, untinted bond was worth more to me than all the millions in the bank. It was the true inheritance. It was the future. The following Saturday, a taxi pulled up the long, winding driveway, its engine a humble sound in the grandeur of the estate. I was waiting on the front steps, my heart doing a nervous little flutter kick against my ribs, just as it had when I waited for her to get off the school bus as a little girl. Em got out of the car, looking small and uncertain in the vast landscape, her school backpack slung over one shoulder. She was 16, caught in that awkward, beautiful space between child and adult, and she was carrying a small, slightly lopsided cake box with the utmost care. As she walked towards me, her eyes, so much like my own, scanned my face, searching for... what? Anger? Resentment? I gave her a small, gentle smile, a signal of unconditional welcome, and I saw her shoulders, which had been tensed up to her ears, visibly relax. She ran the last few feet and wrapped her arms around my waist in a fierce, desperate hug. I held her tight, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo and the faint, sweet smell of sugar, and felt a piece of my heart, a piece I hadn't even realized was still broken, begin to knit itself back together.
I made you something, she mumbled into my cashmere sweater, pulling back and holding up the cake box as if it were a precious offering. It's a lemon drizzle. I know it's your favorite. It might be a little messy. I'm not a very good baker yet. I'm sure, I said, my voice catching. It's the most wonderful cake in the entire world. We spent the day together, just the two of us. I gave her a tour of the house, not as a show of wealth, but as a sharing of my new life, my new world. Her eyes widened at the vibrant colors of the modern art, at the sheer number of books in the two-story library, at the endless, calming view of the sea. There was no greed in her gaze, no calculation, only a genuine, youthful awe. We didn't talk about her parents, not at first. We talked about her school, her friends, her frustrations with algebra, and her passionate dream of becoming a veterinarian. It was easy, natural. It was how it used to be, before things got so complicated. Later, we sat in the bright, airy kitchen, eating messy, delicious slices of her lopsided lemon cake. "Grandma," she said finally, her voice quiet as she traced a pattern in the crumbs on her plate. "Mom told me what you did, with the will." I put my fork down and met her gaze directly, giving her the respect of an honest, adult conversation. "Yes, Em, I did." She said you were punishing her, that you were being cruel. I chose my words carefully, knowing this was perhaps the most important lesson I could ever teach her. This was never about punishment, Em. It was about consequences. For a very long time, your mother and father made choices, and I made it my job to protect them from the consequences of those choices. I can't do that anymore. It wasn't good for them, and it was destroying me. I reached across the table and took her hand, my skin papery against her smooth, youthful one. I want you to learn this much, much earlier than I did, my love. Your kindness, your love, your loyalty, those are precious gifts. They're the most valuable things you will ever have to offer. They should be given to people who will cherish them, who will see them and honor them, not to people who see them as an obligation or an entitlement. Setting a boundary to protect those gifts isn't an act of cruelty. It's an act of profound self-respect. She nodded, her young face serious as she absorbed the weight of my words. I think I understand, she said softly. I don't want to be like them. I don't want to be a person who only thinks about money and what they can get from people. And you won't be, I said with absolute certainty, because you have a good and true heart. That day was the beginning. Emma started visiting every other weekend. Sometimes we would bake. Sometimes we would walk for hours on the beach, our boots sinking into the wet sand as we collected shells. Sometimes we would just sit in the library, each reading our own book in a comfortable, companionable silence. She was rebuilding the bridge that her parents had burned, plank by plank, with her own sincerity and love. She never once asked me for anything. Her presence was the only gift I ever wanted from her. 1 year after that terrible Christmas, my life was unrecognizable. The foundation was thriving. The house, once a symbol of loneliness and overwhelming responsibility, was now filled with life, art, and the frequent, happy laughter of my granddaughter. Harold Carnes had become a constant, gentle, and joyful presence in my life. Our friendship, born from a shared love of art and a mutual respect for Victoria, had slowly, beautifully, and unexpectedly blossomed into something more. He loved me not for my wealth, but for my spirit. He made me laugh every single day. He challenged my ideas. He saw me simply and completely as Eleanor. On Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year and 1 week after Caroline's fateful text message, the house was once again filled with light and warmth. This time, it was a small, perfect gathering. Me, Emma, Patricia, and Harold. We had a wonderful dinner filled with easy conversation and genuine affection. After dinner, as we were sitting by the fire, sipping brandy, Harold turned to me. He took my hand, his expression both nervous and incredibly dear. "Eleanor," he began, his voice soft but clear, "this past year, watching you reclaim your life, build your foundation, and become the magnificent woman Victoria always knew you were, it has been one of the greatest joys of my life. I know we're not spring chickens, and maybe this is foolish at our age, but I find I can't imagine my future without you in it." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, dark blue velvet box. "Eleanor Bennett, will you do me the incredible honor of becoming my wife?" Tears streamed down my face as I whispered, "Yes! Oh, Harold, yes!" As he slipped a beautiful, vintage sapphire ring on my finger, Emma and Patricia cheered. At that exact moment, as if on cue from a master playwright, Mrs. Lynn entered with a small package that had just arrived via a late-night courier. It was a small Christmas card. I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was from Caroline. I took the card. For a moment, I held it in my hand, feeling its negligible weight. A year ago, this would have been a moment of intense conflict, of hope and pain. Now, it was nothing. It was a relic from a different life, a life that no longer belonged to me. I looked at the joyful faces of my true family, bathed in the warm light of the fire. I looked at the stunning ring on my finger, a promise of a future filled with love and mutual respect. Then I turned and, without opening it, I calmly placed my daughter's card into the heart of the fire. We all watched as the flames curled around the edges, consuming the past and turning it to ash. Thank you for listening to my story. It was a painful journey, but it brought me here, to a life more wonderful than I could have ever imagined. The text message that broke my heart was ultimately the thing that set me free. It taught me that true family isn't about blood, it's about respect. It's about who shows up, not just when it's easy, but when it matters. And it taught me that the most important inheritance you can ever claim is your own self-worth.